Hey, everybody, welcome to the second hour of the Santita Jackson Show on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota, and we're streaming on the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel. The Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel, please like and subscribe there. And if you would, please go to the Santita Jackson and Friends Facebook page and like and share there. Like and share. That is where I can accept friends. I can't accept friends on the Santita Jackson page. That is a page that I'm not active there. But Santita Jackson and Friends is my page. That's why I named it Santita Jackson and Friends. I can accept friends here. I can't accept you any place else. So please go to the Santita Jackson and Friends Facebook page and go to the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel so you can not only hear us, but you can see us. Attorney Robert Patillo, National Leadership Team of Rainbow Push, and host of his own show on WAOK, brilliant civil rights lawyer, brilliant man of great opinions. You can see him all over the world, opining. And of course on WAOK every Sunday from 1 to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, WAOK, out of Atlanta, the iconic radio station there. And of course, Reverend Dr. Todd Yeary, National Leadership Team, Rainbow Push, the senior pastor of the iconic Douglas Memorial Community Church. I think you had someone who, what is his name, who preceded you immediately? I think, yeah, that guy, the senator from Georgia, Reverend Dr. Raphael Warnock. That's right. He's part of a great tradition there. We've been talking about Eric Prince and the recolonization of Africa. We heard Dr. Julian Malveaux, the esteemed economist, the president emeritus of Bennett College for Women, talk about China and their ownership of Africa, their owning of Africa. But when you get to Africa, the Chinese cut a different kind of deal in Africa. First of all, they came in striking business deals. I'm not saying that everybody doesn't want access to the wealth of Africa. They do. But they're doing this differently than the Europeans. They're doing it a little bit differently. But now you've got Eric Prince, Trump advisor, brother of Betsy DeVos, Trump education secretary. They're part of one of the wealthiest families in the United States. The head of Blackwater, one of the leading mercenary groups in the world. And you remember the 2007 massacre that they committed. Oh, my goodness. He said, look, if so many of these countries around the world are incapable of governing themselves, it's time for us to just put the imperial hat back on. To say we're going to govern those countries, because enough is enough. We're done. We're done being invaded. You can say that pretty much about all of Africa. And he added Latin America to that too. Before we talk about the latest in the Fonny Willis case, which has us all riveted, put your attention over here, Reverend Dr. Yeary, because you're looking at the court proceedings. Oh, you think you're slick? I love you. But, what about the quiet part out loud? And what about President Obama chiding these African leaders about their corruption, Robert Patillo? And they were so insulted. They were like, I can't believe this brother's coming over here saying this stuff.
Well, it's part of the American empire and American imperialism. I find it comical to hear Europeans and Americans talk about how Africans and people in the Middle East and Central and South America and Asia can't govern themselves. Look, Charlemagne conquered the Saxons in around 800. Then he left the empire to his son, and then they split the empire in three for his grandchildren. The process called gavelkind instead of primogeniture, where you split your holdings among all of your sons as opposed to just passing your titles down to your oldest son. So the three sons go to war between West Francia, which turned into France, East Francia was turned into Germany, and then Middle Francia was turned into Northern Italy, Belgium, Luxembourg, those sorts of places. And they kept fighting from around 900 until 1945. Ostensively, just off and on, fighting over the same territory, pushing the line this way a little bit, pushing the line that way a little bit, killing hundreds of millions of people over that period of time. But for some reason, even though it took them thousands of years to basically get to the lines that they have agreed upon right now, they think that everyone else needs their help learning how to govern themselves. It's the height of white supremacy, is the height of hubris, is the height of hypocrisy. In reality, we know exactly what Prince is talking about. That the European nations and the US realize that the second half of this century will be the African century. And Africa has the youngest population of the globe. The average age on the African continent is like about 19 years old. Africa has access to all the resources of the future, not the resources of the past. The resources of the past are things like gold, silver, cocoa, cotton, those sorts of things. Africa is rich in things such as cobalt, tritium, lithium, uranium, everything that makes modern society able to operate. You have to dig out of the ground in Africa. And if you can't get in Africa, the lithium in your cell phone battery comes out of a mine in Chile, almost assuredly. What runs your electric vehicle comes out of mines in Southeast Asia. And when he says they need to go back to the age of empire, what he is saying is going to these countries, toppling their governments, setting up public regimes, and being able to extract all the resources necessary to run modern Western society, because they do not have those resources where they live at. The reason for European colonization of the quote-unquote New World was they could not move past the Ottoman Empire. They could not move past the Golden Horde or the Mongol Empire. They could not move through the Persian empires or the Sassanids or Sasanian empires. They could not go through the Mughal Empire. So because of that, they had to figure out somewhere else to go. And then they went and launched a 1,000-year war on a bunch of people who had no idea that they were going to war with them. So when Eric Prince is talking about these things, what he's really talking about is how exactly Western society will fuel a dying population. The American birth rate is 1.68%. You have to have a birth rate over 2 in order to be able to replace yourself, as in 2 parents produce 2 children to replace themselves. Right now in America, 2 parents produce 1.68 children, therefore they cannot fully replace themselves. And if you look at Western Europe, France is at about 1.1%, Great Britain is about 1.3%, Germany is right at 1.4%, Russia is even lower than that. So the white population is dying off. Ostensibly, you have maybe 2 to 3 generations before they are no longer even a force in world politics. And Eric Prince and many other white supremacists realize that the only way to turn this around is to go and start stealing other people's land and resources and having the territory necessary to have as many babies as possible to rebirth the white race before they go extinct. This is all about colonialism. This is all about white supremacy. This is all about the destruction of black civilization, as the book by Chancellor Wilhelm pointed out, and the idea that they have this almost manifest destiny to have control over all the resources of the world in order to fuel their society.
So, I mean, is it not noteworthy that our UN ambassadors, African American, from the United States to the United Nations, AFRICOM? I mean, you have these, you had, I mean, the head of Joint Chiefs of Staff, Black. I mean, now we've ground up imperialism.
Look, the truth is, anybody who works for the U.S. government is by their very nature a war criminal. There's no way around it. There's no ifs, ands, and buts around it. It doesn't matter if they have a brown suit on or a gray suit. It doesn't matter if they have brown skin or white skin. You oversee an American empire that commits war crimes on a daily basis at every corner of the globe. And the idea of simply putting brown faces in place to execute white supremacist policies still reinforces the exact same thing. Every plantation had a couple people out there who will make sure that everybody stayed in line. If you're still executing the same white policies of white supremacy, it doesn't matter the color of the person doing so.
Reverend Dr. Todd Urey.
The issue of imperialism.
Interesting now, Reverend Dr. Urey, if you don't mind.
Well,
we were browning up imperialism, and we're amping up imperialism. Do you think we're taking notice of that first?
Well, it depends on who the we is, right? That's kind of the law school answer to most questions. It's not always a yes or no.
You're sounding very Clinton-esque.
It depends. It's not what it is. It depends on what the meaning of is. That's not where we are.
That was good.
but the imperialistic notion. I want to go back to something as Robert was talking about gold, the the essential assets of high value, except in one instance. When it made me think about this new interest in Africa to be colonized, literally. The US dollar and the uncertainty in the US economy, as the dollar being the world currency, has been a question now for some time. And there have been these subtle conversations about possibly how legitimate or realistic it might be. We can debate, but they have posited the possibility of going back to the gold standard. The gold standard is particularly important because the reserves of gold that is actually held physically, the United States holds the vast majority of it. But if your currency is facing stress because you're having these internal fights about how you're going to deal with your own economic realities, you keep pushing the U.S. economy to the brink of default. You keep demonstrating that you don't have or don't take seriously the issue of U.S. debt when you have foreign debt holders who actually could come make some demands. I think in that context, there's some of that. I'm not saying it's very forward in their thought, but it kind of comes to my mind when we start thinking about we're not really interested in creating legitimate government. The U.S. doesn't take interest in the legitimacy of governments where there's no asset value to undergird it. There are a whole lot of places that the United States could say they don't have legitimate governments, but that if they don't have significant natural resources internally that the U.S. wants to be able to exploit, they don't really spend a lot of time there. They're not really interested in that. And so when you hear Prince saying that let's recolonize, let's do this again, it worked so good the first few times, let's try it one more time. That's really the conversation here. And the reason the conversation continues is because the land is still valuable. The conversation in the prior hour when Mark Fancher and Professor Akawete were talking about the repatriation of lands that had been taken during the periods of racial apartheid, racial hostility, and that somehow being read or reasoned to be improper, right? We didn't call the first taking bad. It's like watching a football game and two players get in a fight, but whoever throws the second punch, they get the flag. It's kind of that kind of tension that says, first of all, we don't want people from those S-hole countries anyway. Let's be clear on that. But we want to colonize them. For what purpose, right? It's just kind of the cognitive dissonance that they are relying upon to make these very curious statements as somehow being not only well-reasoned, but actually conceivable. And so we have to, particularly as people of African descent, people who have ties, ancestry, DNA still coursing our veins that keep us forever connected, we have to bring a what we will call in theology a hermeneutic, an interpretation of suspicion about how these statements are made and why they are made. And in this instance, it isn't goodwill that's attached to the assessment that we need to bring credibility to African governance. That's not what this is. This isn't a charitable suggestion. This isn't let us lend you some of our diplomats to help you work through some of your administrative difficulties. This is, we want to come take you over because we would rather displace you than validate you, because then that forces you. Another reason is they're trying to break up. I just looked at the numbers. Recently, 64% of the loans made on the continent of Africa came from the China government and the China Development Bank. And so if you're trying to control China's influence in Africa, then what do? You make this claim that gives you the opportunity to go be the police across the world, and then you just start finding some basis for there to be a conflict, and it then becomes a version of the Kerner Commission report and what we saw with urban unrest after during the summers leading up to and after Dr. King's assassination, it then becomes the Kerner Commission report of international affairs. Let's create a conflict, falsely justify our imposition of our military interests there, go in and not put troops on the ground, but certainly put mortar rounds and ordnance there that says made in the USA, and then create the kind of crisis that then we get to go in and redevelop the country to rebuild it with our own proxy government in place. We've seen it before. It's not new. It really isn't that intriguing this time. I think it's just critical that we recognize that we have to continue to resist the imperialistic notions that come from a variety of places within the oligarchy of the country, to make sure that the integrity and the independence of African countries, even as they're working through their challenges, and the U.S. continues to work through its challenges too, that we protect that kind of value and integrity for sovereign nations.
I was just going to piggyback off of Reverend Yerry's point and just point out that this is not a theoretical exercise that we have to dive into. We don't have to guess about this. Just look at what's going on in Haiti right now and for the last 5 years. Everyone, my family's from Haiti, so everyone I speak to believes that the U.S. government was behind the assassination of President Moise and the forces behind them. If you look at the gangs that are running the streets of Haiti right now, people like Jimmy Barbecue, Shemigier, they'll tell you the weapons they have come from America. That's where the guns come from, whether they're civilian or governmental. It's illegal to sell weapons in Haiti. No, there's not a gun shop on the entire island. There's not a manufacturer of bullets on the island. There's not a manufacturer of firearms. So how does everyone have an AR-15 and an AK-47? Because they come from America. And what you do is destabilize the government by assassinating a president who was trying to make deals with Middle Eastern nations and South American nations to not actually have to be on the teat of America and have some sort of independence. So you have him killed. You have his wife taken to Florida. And then you make sure that there's no legitimate governing officials in the entire country. There's not a single elected official in Haiti on any level right now, has not been so for the past 5 years. There's no functioning government there currently. The Prime Minister, Ariel Henry, he took office just shortly before Moise was assassinated, and then just declared himself president or the prime minister. He was never elected to the position. So because of this, you run the nation down to the point that the people themselves start begging and saying, we don't have clean water, we don't have clean food, people are being kidnapped, people are being murdered in the streets, rapes are going rampant, please come and save us. And then what happens? The U.S., the UN, and France get to ride in like heroes and say, my Lord, we get to help these poor savages down here who couldn't even take care of themselves. I have no idea what could have happened to them, but we're going to put in place our own colonial governor to make sure that we can get things back up and running. Now, how do we know this is exactly what's going to happen? That's exactly what happened with President Aristide in the early 90s. Coming out of Papa Doc and Baby Doc, they put in Aristide, and then when Aristide turned against him, George Bush literally kidnapped the man and dropped him off in Africa. So we don't have to act as if we this is theoretical. We don't have to act as if we don't know what's going to happen. We've seen this movie before multiple times. This isn't even the sequel. This is like Freddy versus Jason Part 10. We know exactly what this is, a movie franchise. This is the Marvel Cinematic Universe of American colonialism and imperialism. And unless we're willing to recognize that now, we can't take these as being simple statements. They're just being made on a podcast. And the point about invasion that Professor Akoete made earlier is an important one, because we hear this from conservatives on the right. Governor Abbott said he's declaring the migrant crisis to be an invasion. We hear this from Ted Cruz. We hear this from many. The reason that they want to declare it an invasion is so they can use military force to overtake parts of Mexico. because Mexico has ascended into being America's #1 trade partner. Mexico has ascended from being a quote-unquote third world country to being one of the leading manufacturers in the world. Mexico has factories that are being built by the Chinese government since the Trump tariffs in order to work their way around the tariffs that have been created, and they're producing many of the manufactured goods that used to be produced in Southeast Asia. And these people want to declare this an invasion, so they have a casus belli to move troops down. Nikki Haley said it during the debates that she will send American troops into Mexico. That is an act of war. They're not going there simply to quote unquote stop the migrant crisis. What are troops going to do to stop starving people walking 1,000 miles to get away from drought and genocide? What they're talking about doing is going there to take territory. They're replaying the Alamo again, and they want to act as if we don't see what's going on.
Do they really think that they can just walk into these countries in 2024? Can you just walk into Haiti, Robert Patillo?
Yes, and they're doing it currently. I'll give you another example currently. When we talk about the Sahel in Africa, the West African nations that were previously part of the CFA franc, the 14 nations that France still controls their economies, when you started seeing Chad and Niger and Mali and Burkina Faso all separate themselves from Uncle Tom governments that were being run by the French in absentia, everyone said, oh my God, these poor people, they're going to run themselves into the ground. They're without the French there to control them, without the French puppets there to control them. What are they going to do? And they almost got ECOWAS, the East African states of Nigeria and some of the other ones, to invade them. They tried to have those nations invade their African brothers and sisters on behalf of France. Luckily, the people of those countries rebelled against them. Nigeria was literally getting ready to invade Niger on behalf of the French, but the Nigerian people stood up and said, we will not fight them. That's the only reason we did not see a war break out in the Sahel. And what have we seen since then? The French were paying something like $5 a kilogram for uranium from Niger. Since then, Niger's been able to sell that same uranium at the market rate of $1,100 a kilogram. They have the fastest growing economy on the African continent. Standards of living are increasing throughout the Sahel region. More nations are talking about moving away from the CFA franc. So the idea that they have to always have is that you have to be on this teat of the Western governments or else you'll die on the vine. But what we saw is when the people stand up and decide they're not going to be puppets of the foreign powers, African nation can prosper because they have the resources necessary. They have all the education, all the resources, all they need to have the jackboot of the European powers off of their neck.
How has the perception of America changed since Obama in these Black countries, in Haiti? What were they hoping for? What did they get? Let me start with you, Robert, and then I'm going to pivot to you, Reverend Dr. Uri.
I think most people around the globe, when they saw the Obama speeches in 2008, they really thought that he was being for real. When they talked about hope and change, people thought that he was really going to bring hope and change. When he said, I'm going to heal the earth, people thought that he was going to heal the earth. Remember that he got a Nobel Peace Prize preemptively. They just gave it to him because they thought he was going to bring peace to the globe. And what we saw instead was simply a extension of American neoconservative military-industrial complex. He expanded the drone war. Not only did he not close Gitmo, he expanded Gitmo. Not only did he not end the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, he sent more troops in. We had the surge, if people remember that, who are of a certain age to remember those days. And more so, when he went to the African continent on his tour, he went there to push the American social agenda, not to help those nations. He went to Uganda and waved his finger at them to say, you need to change your laws about gay people. And the Ugandans said, we got real problems over here. That is not on our agenda right now. We'll get to that when when our society decides so. But we need aid, we need food, we need water, we need resources. And I think the level of disappointment around the globe and domestically, also around the failures of Obama to live up to the hope and change, is what has led to this new strain of right-wing authoritarianism and extremism that has overtaken much of the Western world. We have Donald Trump taking over in the United States of America. We have the Tories taking power in Great Britain. Everybody from Boris Johnson to Rishi Sunak to Liz Truss. In France, you have Macron, who's a neo-imperialist, reflecting on many of the things that fascists have said in the past. Giorgia Meloni in Italy literally calls herself a neo-Mussolini fascist in charge of that country. Viktor Orban in Hungary very much aligns himself with this conceptualization of a strong Europe reconquering many parts of the Middle East. Going all the way to Lukashenko or Erdogan, Schultz in Germany. We are seeing the rearming of Poland right now. So I think the failures of Obama are going to have repercussions reverberating around the globe for decades to come. And I think that might have been the breaking point for that kind of ascension into a liberal democracy future versus kind of a retraction into an authoritarian past. And what we've seen since then is that authoritarianism has been on the rise and hope and change has been on the back foot.
You know, it's very interesting when we were at President Kenyatta's inauguration some years ago. I went with Reverend Jackson. They had they treat Reverend Jackson, many people don't know, but you know this, Reverend Dr. Yuri, you know this, Attorney Patello. When Reverend goes into these countries, they treat him as a head of state. And he is actually beloved. So they marched everyone they drove everyone into the stadium. And there were all of these cheers for all of the leaders. I mean, my goodness. And everyone was very excited because, of course, this is Kenyatta's son, Jomo Kenyatta's son, right? But what was interesting was to watch watching, the love for Reverend was heartwarming because, just to see him he is seen as a freedom fighter. But to see the love that the people had for Mugabe, contrasting and comparing it, of course, Reverend Dr. Yuri, with the hatred in the West for this man who said, I want my land back. I mean, as we looked at, it was just kind of made me just go, ugh. When Queen Elizabeth died, God bless her, she's a mother, wife, grandmother, all of that, the head of imperialism. I mean, come on. And refused to have Mugabe carried that pain to his grave. He said to us with tears in his eyes, he said, when I demanded the land back, she refused to sit with me. She refused. She wouldn't even talk to me. So when it's about getting the power, getting my land, the diamonds, all of the minerals that are underneath that land, it's a real problem. And now we have Black people who are heading up imperialism and claiming imperialism as their own, Reverend Dr. Yuri. I just think that that's something about that's real off. But then I'm not an imperialist.
And it wouldn't make sense, and it shouldn't. I think what we find is, in theory, the United States advances independence with one caveat. You don't expect us to give back the land that we stole from you. So we will give you an emotional, theoretical win on paper. But the minute you start unraveling what this was really all about in the first place, was the control of land. That's what the fight is for. Once you start deconstructing that, correcting that, then not only are you not welcome, you're actually a pariah and an enemy.
Mm-hmm.
And that's been the whole fight around, quite honestly, why you don't get a whole lot of movement on reparations.
Mm-hmm.
because real reparations is not just paying restitution for the value of the harm. Give the land back to the people who had it.
The 40 acres and my mule.
Well, not before you get to the 40 acres and the mule. Let's take the indigenous people who were here when Columbus got lost, and we say he found America, even though Amerigo Vespucci was here a long time before him, and that's who the country is named for anyway. That the whole ability to create this false narrative that justifies imperial hostility that is carried out into perpetuity is part of the problem. And so what they do is they frame this issue and this narrative to be able to speak to the people and say that the way we're doing it is a way that's going to make these backward folk better after we go and impose our will on them. And so this really isn't about us being unjust. We're really coming in to be merciful. And so they should thank us. It's kind of a more polished way of what Governor DeSantis said about slavery being a good job training program. He wasn't all that nuanced, but it's the same kind of thinking. He's not a deviant from the discussion. He's just one of them that they didn't train well to figure out how to say it in a way that wouldn't offend most people who have a clue. But the reality is the imperialistic notion is as tied to the DNA of the country as is the DNA that courses my veins from my mother and father. I can't separate myself from the two. And so the U.S. is an imperialistic experiment that borrowed the imperialistic notions of Mother England. And the only difference was they didn't want a king. They wanted the same kind of benefit. They just wanted to say there wouldn't be some process. It's the same thing. The king controlled the church. The king controlled the courts. The king controlled the lands. Well, here, we don't want to control the church, even though we do. We don't want to control the land, even though we do. And we certainly control the courts, which is the way it plays out. And then we impose that rubric, that template on anybody else that has something we want. And we're going to create a false justification to go get it, lest we make ourselves really the boogeyman that we say everybody else should be afraid of.
Mm-hmm. Dwight McKee, Eric Prince says that we need to put our imperial hat back on and govern and take over Latin America and take over Africa. Before we get a quick update on Fonny Willis, we have less than 20 minutes before we get out of here. And we've all, for the audience, we've all been riveted by that. Reverend Dr. Yeary looking at the court proceedings right now. They're on break. But that too has been a lot, and it seems that we were kind of ahead of the story with our discussion about it yesterday, right? But Dwight, what about putting this imperialist hat back on?
Well, we never took it off. See, to understand his position, you have to understand Europe and what Europe is. Europe is about 10 tribes who have as a continent, no real natural resources. They don't have a lot of natural resources. And so the history of Europe is one tribe plundering the next tribe, whether it was, the English and the Irish taking all the potatoes so the Irish starved to death, whether it was the Vandals, is where we get the word vandalism. They vandalized everybody else on the continent. It's the barbarian tribes. That's what they're called, the barbarian tribes. And so what they found is once they found some land with natural resources that could grow food and had water, had wood, it gave them some place to go that was off of their barren continent. And so what you have is these 10 tribes finding virgin land all over the world and going in and stealing that land. So it is the Western way. It is the European way. It is what Europeans even survive is as historically by plunder or banditry, even if they were just plundering each other. And so now what's happening is that as they realize that people are resisting that, or people have declared their own independence from that, they need a pretext to go back and do that again. So again, as Yuri just said, under the guise of saving us and helping us, now they want to come in and take control and be in control of the land and the continent because we can't govern ourselves and we can't protect ourselves. It's amazing when Leopold was killing millions and millions and millions of Africans who was right up the street from the English, that they were not concerned enough to go and take him out and save the genocide of the Congo. It's very interesting how when the Palestinians are being genocided by the Israelis, that they're not so concerned that they want to go and take over Israel and protect the Palestinians. All of it is a pretext for more exploitation, more plunder, more justification of ethnic cleansing and be replaced with more Europeans.
You know, and Robert Patillo, before we pivot to Fonny Willis, I mean, it's right off of our shores that we're watching this happen in real time in Haiti. Just, it has never stopped.
And as Dwight said, this idea of putting our imperial hat back on is not so much putting it on as because as he said, we never took it off, but they're talking about just making it overt again. Think about what happened throughout the 1960s when America simply funded quote unquote counter-revolutionaries to spread democracy and independence throughout the world. What it was really about was buying mercenary armies to keep the people's liberation movements around the globe down. Because if the people were choosing communism, then you don't get a choice. We believe in self-governance and self-rule so long as you choose the team that we told you to choose. And if you don't, you're about to get yourself some nice American bombs that will bring you freedom from choosing the wrong government. And they're talking about doing the exact same thing again. And we, the American people and the people, quite frankly, of the decolonized world, have to start understanding that this is the plan they are putting in place, and they're doing it right in front of them. There's a report, but before we change topics, there's a report that came out from Congress just yesterday, where everybody was saying there's a massive national security issue because Russia is considering putting nuclear weapons in space.
Yes.
The reason that is of concern to them is those nuclear weapons are not to drop on America. They are to explode in space to release what's called an electromagnetic pulse, an EMP. What that will do is shut down every satellite within a radius around it, and that would cripple American technology. America, as we said earlier, is fighting a drone war. We're developing a drone army. Russia cannot keep up technologically. How do you disable a drone army? You do that by getting rid of the satellites that control them, by putting nukes in space. So when we talk about them doing all these things directly in front of us and fighting this proxy war in front of us, they're reporting it on the news. None of this is kept secret. And I made this point on Instagram earlier that Tucker Carlson sat down with Vladimir Putin for an interview where Putin basically said, I'm going to invade the Balkans, Estonia, and Latvia as soon as I get done with Ukraine. That is ostensibly what Putin said during it. That interview got 17 million views. Shannon Sharp sat down with Cat Williams to talk about mess and gossip. It has 100 million views. We can't blame people for saying that they didn't tell us. They'll put it right in front of our face and we'll still go find some entertainment to look at instead of these people talking about blowing up all the satellites in space and launching a robot war to conquer nations.
Well, you know, I think the significance, I will say this about the Cat Williams interview, is culture really does matter. And to understand how culture is controlled and who's allowed to speak to us and shape our perceptions, that's a big deal. But we can talk about that Cat Williams interview another time. I do want to talk, I've gotten several calls from Dwight McKee about the Fonny Willis, about this trial today. Why was it significant to you, Dwight?
Because it is really the only one that can actually take Trump out is Fonny Willis. And because she has a state trial, and the nature of the charges is he can't really pardon himself, and he would do real jail time. And we've always predicted that at one level or another, she was going to be taken out. We didn't expect she would help take herself out, but that with the kind of scrutiny, kind of pressure that she would be under for this kind of case, that you have not a lot of margins for error on this one. And so she kind of put herself in a position to be challenged in terms of, integrity and her right to stay on this trial. And so it really is at one level for all of the marbles, because there's a good chance if Trump can escape this, that he can be the president again and he can forgive himself of all his other sins and debts. I didn't think that the trial went extremely well for her because she had a prosecution hat on. And so it was one prosecutor against another prosecutor, which means that she didn't get a lot. I don't think she got a lot of sympathy. The judge seemed a little empathetic, but when I listened to what the public was saying, what some of the commentators were saying, they didn't seem very sympathetic. And some of the things that she said was fairly incredulous in that, that she walked around with $4,000 or $5,000 or $6,000 in her pocketbook. And that's how she paid her bills. That's how she paid him. So it's going to be very interesting to see how this thing plays out.
Robert Patillo, you worked down in Atlanta in her space, and you have, I guess you have faced off against her in court. Yes?
I've tried cases against Fonny on many occasions, and this is the problem with prosecutors often when they try to go into criminal defense after they leave the prosecutor's office. You can't. It's two completely different skill sets. It's the way I like to describe it is if you take the best linebacker in football and you tell him to go play quarterback. He's not going to be the best at it because it's two completely different skill sets. Yes, they are both great football players, but a linebacker can't play quarterback, and a quarterback can't go, cover a cross across the middle, something like that. And because she's a prosecutor, during this hearing today, she came out as a prosecutor, calling people liars, being completely dismissive of the people against her, having a very angry and off-putting tone around them. As a defense lawyer, you're trying to elicit sympathy. You're trying to explain your situation. The burden is on the other side. You don't need to prove a negative. And I think that just as Dwight said, we've seen this so many times, particularly with Black politicians, where they put themselves behind the eight ball. They forget they're playing the white boys game and they can't play by the same rules, and they get sloppy and they get caught every time. Whether it's Fonny Willis in this affair in Atlanta, whether it's Marilyn Mosby and the mortgage thing, or whether it's Catherine Pugh and the Healthy Holly books, whether it's Kwame Kilpatrick and the Mistress, whether it's Jefferson and the $90,000 wrapped in aluminum foil and the freezer. You can go on down the line. It continuously happens, and people have to understand that when you are in this arena with lions, the last thing you want to do is put hot sauce on yourself to give them an opportunity. Make them at least work to try to take you down. You have to cross every T and dot every I and not leave anything unturned. And the fact that they don't do it again and again and again is us shooting us in the foot. It's one thing to be fighting against white supremacy. It's another thing to help them on down the line.
It's just the problem is nobody is perfect. And so the thing is, because nobody is perfect and everybody's got stain and flaw, Reverend Dr. Uri, you keep the best people out the arena instead of getting in the arena and saying, hey, I'm imperfect when I'm present.
Let's be real clear on this objective. Fonny Willis is a thorn to the establishment of political dominance for a former president. And really, what is at stake is 16 votes. Remember, he said he needed 11,700 votes to be able to win. The votes he's really after is the 16 electoral college votes. Neither U.S. Senate seat is on the ballot this time. So the big prize in Georgia is the electoral college votes. That's what he's after. And he's speaking to a base to get them ready to go out and vote, to stand in line, to do whatever they have to do. And many of them will do what we call single shoot. They're not paying attention to anything else on that ballot except being ready to vote for president. Now, here's what where I do think a little bit differently than my brothers do. She's not looking for sympathy. There's a judge. This isn't a jury. So the judge is not going to be sympathetic. She's arguing the technicalities of, can the other side put her in a box where he, the judge, will make a determination to disqualify her or her office from participating in this trial. Here's where I think she's going to possibly have some issues, because I listened to a bit of it and you were calling me out.
No, not just a little bit.
So I was
remember this video now.
I was taking a gander every now and then and trying to listen a little bit, listen with this ear and listen something different with this ear. And one of the questions came up that I knew was going to come up, and they put in front of her ethics disclosure, her public filing, and started asking her, where does the gift show up? All right. I don't know. I couldn't really catch how she answered that, but my guess is going to be, even if she's not disqualified, they're really not trying to, if they can get her disqualified, great. What they're really trying to do is to get her under oath, possibly making a misstatement. They will then claim she has perjured herself.
Absolutely. That
would then lead to them further pulling that thread, undermining her credibility, and creating enough red meat for the other side to have them ready to do whatever they need to do to protect the former president. I do think, though, that the new shift is going to be, timing wise, though it's not as sensational as the voting issue in Georgia, is the former president now has a criminal trial date. March 25th, he will go to trial on the hush money issue in New York. That was determined today. The judge issued the ruling. And so he's got pressure from a couple of places. I'm not sure how strong the case is, but you may likely see that there's a shift in focus. But Fonny Willis and this whole issue, let's just talk about what this is. For whatever reason, the stigma assigned to Black elected officials often has something to do with sex and money. In this case, it's both. Who you sleeping with, how long you've been sleeping with them, how much money do you carry around, and they start scrutinizing whether or not Black professional people, men, women, otherwise, are able to carry around a certain amount of cash on their person. And one of the responses she gave is, look, when I travel internationally, I carry a lot of cash because of the exchange rate. I don't go to the foreign exchange at the airport because the rates aren't as good. I know that to be the case. Took students to Africa every year, and I got on the plane with some cash. And they would tell you, don't bring 5s and 10s and 20s. Bring 50s and 100s. Bring big bills to be able to get a better exchange rate so that you can negotiate in the economy of the country where you're visiting. But the whole point is this is a modern version of, let's pin her with a scarlet letter.
Can I add a caveat to that?
3 minutes.
Yuri?
Go ahead.
Is that I think they're talking to two different audiences. I think she's talking to the judge. I think Trump is talking to the jury pool. And so even if she stays on the case, by the time her reputation is tainted and her credibility is questioned, the next time around when there is a jury, they will have legitimate questions about the viability and the legitimacy of her motives and her Trump motives around why Trump is being tried, and her legitimacy. That's the word I want to come up with, because he came out in some level so incredulous that I think the average person will say, okay, you was carrying around $5,000 to $10,000 at a time, but you couldn't pay your tax bill. Okay. You was going on trips with him and didn't pay nothing by credit card. You paid all cash. Okay. So why you say you after Trump again because he's guilty, or is that based on your ambition? So I think they really kind of were speaking to two different audiences.
I think you're right. I think they're trying to also set it up They're not trying to speak to an audience in Fulton County. They are not trying to sully her for a Fulton County jury. They're trying to make a case that even if she is not disqualified, the defense is going to argue that the case is so tainted, the potential favors run so deep, they're going to sully this thing, and eventually they're going to make an argument that if they can't get the case gone, they need a change of venue so that he can get, as the defendant, a fair trial. And I think that's where they're really trying to go. They don't want a Fulton County jury.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, absolutely not. Robert, I've got less than a minute.
Well, just to Reverend Yuri's point, and this is why I said that early on, as soon as this whole scandal got started, she may have been able to recuse herself and simply have the case taken over by the DeKalb County Prosecutor's Office run by Sherry Boston. It is an adjoining county. They have a very similar demographics. But if this goes to Brian Kemp to make the decision on appointing a new prosecutor, he could bury this thing down in Oglethorpe, Georgia, right next to the Trump trade store, and wouldn't not one person in there, no matter what you presented, convict him of any crime known to man. So this is why I say the hubris involved, because if you could have got this transferred to Clayton County, Gwinnett County, DeKalb County, counties where Black people are actually located at, you still have a chance of winning. You move this thing down to Brunswick, Georgia, then Trump might not only will he not get convicted, they might make him mayor also.
Well,
And if I was Trump, I would appoint. If I was,
I have a hard out. Got a hard out, everybody.
I was.
950 radio. The voice of Santita. No, I gotta go.
Okay.
I'm on the countdown. Everybody, stay right here. And of course, I'll see you on Monday on the Santita Jackson Show, AM 950 radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. Like and subscribe on the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel, and please like and share on the Santita Jackson and Friends page. I want to be your friend. I want you to be mine. What a tremendous, tremendous conversation. Thank you, Reverend Yuri. Thank you, Robert Patillo. Thank you, Dwight McKee. God bless you, everybody.
I was going to say, guys, if I were Trump, I would appoint her to